When my son told me, "Mom, you need to find somewhere else to spend your last years," I packed my bags like the obedient mother I'd always been. 3 days later, I was sitting in a lawyer's office in downtown Chicago, uncovering that my late husband had been playing a longer game than anyone realized. Colin was about to learn that sometimes the pawn becomes the queen. 2 months earlier, I was Elaine Carter, devoted wife for 42 years and mother to one spectacularly ungrateful son. When Richard, my husband, died suddenly of a stroke at 70, I thought my world had ended. Colin swept in during my grief like a rescuer in a tailored suit, murmuring how hard this must be, while Nadia, his wife, nodded with polished sympathy. Colin had always been Richard's golden boy, the child who could do no wrong. When he married Nadia, a banker hungry for status, Richard doted on them and their children endlessly. Meanwhile, I was the background figure who cooked, cleaned, and held our lives together. After the funeral, Colin's concern about me grew relentless. He and Nadia brought glossy brochures of retirement complexes, their words dripping with practiced warmth. "Mom, these places are amazing. You'll have activities, security, companionship. It's not healthy to stay here alone." But behind the words, I saw calculation. They weren't suggesting comfort. They were maneuvering. The blow landed on a Thursday. I had been living in what Colin now called our house for 6 weeks since Richard's death, sleeping in the guest room because I couldn't bear to touch the bedroom I'd shared with my husband. Colin and Nadia arrived with 2 suitcases, their kids waiting in the car. "Mom," Colin said smoothly, "we've made a decision. Nadia's promotion requires us to move into town. This house is perfect for us." I blinked. "Move in?" "Colin, this is my home." His mask slipped. "Actually, Mom, according to Dad's will, everything belongs to me. The house, the assets, the accounts. I let you stay out of kindness, but now you need to find your own place." The words hit harder than any slap. 42 years reduced to nothing. "Colin, this must be a mistake." "No mistake," he said, cold now. "Dad knew I could protect his legacy. You never understood money. You were just the wife. Just the wife." That night, I packed my life into 2 suitcases and a box of photographs. Colin stood at the doorway, checking his watch impatiently, as though I were making him late for dinner reservations. "There's a senior complex on Lakeshore Drive," Nadia chirped. "Affordable, clean, always has vacancies." Affordable. They were inheriting millions, and yet suggested I move into a bare-bones facility for forgotten seniors. Their driver loaded my suitcases into their gleaming BMW, as if he were hauling trash. "You'll love your independence, Mom," Colin said, eyes fixed on the driveway. "No more home," he meant. From the back seat, I watched the house, my house, fade in the rearview mirror. The walls that had held my marriage, my sacrifices, my son's entire childhood disappeared into Chicago's skyline. The motel they dropped me at charged $59 a night. The air conditioner rattled, the sheets smelled faintly of bleach. Nadia pressed $200 into my hand as if tipping a hotel maid. "This will cover you until you get settled," she said. Alone on a sagging mattress, I stared at my suitcases. My son, the boy I had raised, fed, and loved, had discarded me like a broken appliance. But one thought clawed at me: Richard had been meticulous. Years ago, he'd shown me his will, explained his wishes in detail. He could be traditional, sometimes patronizing about money, but never cruel. He would never have left me penniless. The next morning, I scraped together bus fare and went downtown to see Richard's attorney, Mr. Jameson, a seasoned lawyer in his 70s with wire-rimmed glasses. When his secretary announced me, he looked up, surprised. "Elaine? I've been calling for weeks. Colin said you were traveling." Traveling. That was Colin's lie. "Mr. Jameson," I said, my voice unsteady. Please tell me about Richard's will. He frowned. Didn't Colin give you a copy? I handed him the original after the reading. My stomach dropped. Reading? I wasn't told there was one. Colin told me Richard left everything to him. Mr. Jameson's face darkened. He pulled a thick file from his cabinet, spread it on his desk, and handed me a notarized document with Richard's unmistakable signature. Elaine, your husband's will is crystal clear. He left the house to you. 70% of the assets, nearly $30 million, to you. To Colin, $10 million in trust, conditional on how he treated you after Richard's death. Conditional. Richard had known. I sat frozen, realizing the truth. My son had lied, forged, stolen. And in doing so, he had triggered the very clause meant to shield me. The words on the page blurred as I reread them again and again. Richard had not abandoned me. He had protected me, even from the child we had raised together. My hands trembled as I closed the file. Mr. Jameson, I whispered, Colin told me I inherited nothing. He moved into my house. He gave me $200 and told me to find a senior home. His face flushed with outrage. Elaine, what Colin has done is elder fraud. Forgery, theft, and coercion. Your husband anticipated this very possibility. That's why he updated the will 6 months before his death. We're calling the police. By the time I left Jameson's office that day, the wheels of justice were in motion. Accounts frozen. Utility transfers halted. A detective named Carla Ramirez was assigned to my case. A sharp-eyed woman with no patience for excuses, she flipped through the forged documents Colin had shoved under my nose. These aren't amateur fakes, she said. Someone in finance helped craft them. Your son didn't do this alone. Nadia. Within hours, the fallout began. Bank accounts Colin thought he controlled bounced his transactions. His credit cards declined. The utilities he'd moved into his name were suspended. At 3:17 p.m., my phone lit up. Colin. Mom? There's some mistake. The bank froze everything. What's happening? I steadied my voice. Hello, Colin. I'm sitting in Mr. Jameson's office. You remember him, Dad's lawyer, the one who read the real will. Silence. Then his voice sharpened. Mom, I don't know what you think you discovered, but I discovered you lied. You forged documents. You threw me out of my home. Sweetheart, I also discovered that your father was much smarter than you realized. He tried to pivot. I was protecting you. You've never managed money, Mom. You don't understand investments. I understand fraud. I understand betrayal. I understand that Dad left me everything, and you triggered the clause that takes away your $10 million. It's mine now. You wouldn't dare, he hissed. Watch me. Detective Ramirez, sitting across from me, nodded in approval as I hung up. He'll push harder, she said. These people don't give up easily. But every word you just said is evidence. That night, Colin and Nadia went out to dinner at a swanky downtown steakhouse. They didn't know surveillance was already tracking them. At 9:30 p.m., officers walked in and placed Colin under arrest in front of his dinner companions. Witnesses said Nadia's face drained of color as he was handcuffed. The next morning, they arrested her at her office. Investigators had traced the forged documents back to one of her colleagues in the investment firm, a man already under investigation for securities fraud. By noon, I was back in my home. The house felt different, not because Richard was gone, but because for the first time in 42 years, I wasn't a supporting character. I was the owner. I stood in the master bedroom, where Colin and Nadia had already moved their things, and packed their clothes into trash bags. I set them on the porch. They could collect them when bail allowed. Jameson called later with updates. Colin's bail is $100,000. Nadia's is $250,000. With all accounts frozen, I doubt they'll make it easily. I poured myself a glass of wine from the very collection Richard had loved and sat at the dining table, my table. The phone buzzed. A text from Colin. Mom, don't do this. Think of the kids. Think of family. Family. I typed back, family doesn't steal from each other. Tell the kids the truth when they're old enough. Detective Ramirez called later that evening. Elaine, we're opening a larger investigation. The documents are too sophisticated for a spur-of-the-moment scam. We need to know how deep this goes. Will you cooperate? Yes, I said. My voice was steady now. For 42 years, I played the obedient wife. Not anymore. Let's finish this. The Queen had made her first move. The next morning, Detective Ramirez arrived at my home with 2 agents from the Financial Crimes Division. Their files were thick, their expressions tight. Mrs. Carter, Ramirez began, we believe your son and his wife weren't just trying to steal your inheritance. They may have uncovered something about Richard's business dealings, something they thought they could use as leverage. My chest tightened. Richard was meticulous. Honest. He wasn't that kind of man. Ramirez slid a file across the table. Take a look. Inside were records from Richard's consulting firm, payments to shell companies, contracts with businesses that existed only on paper, consulting fees that made no sense. What is this? I whispered. Evidence, one of the agents said, of large-scale money laundering. We think Richard's firm was used to move millions in illicit funds. The question is whether he was complicit, or something else. I stared at the papers, my mind rebelling. Richard, the man who brought me flowers on anniversaries, who kissed me goodbye before every business trip, had been laundering money? Is it possible, I asked slowly, that he didn't know? That someone else was using his firm? The agent hesitated. Unlikely. These transactions were structured. Intentional. The room spun. My son's betrayal was one wound, now my husband's ghost threatened another. Ramirez placed a steady hand on mine. There's more. Colin and Nadia's legal team is already sniffing around these records. They may try to use Richard's past to cut a deal. If they succeed, you could lose everything. The government could seize the assets as proceeds of crime. I sat in silence, the weight of 42 years pressing down. That evening, a private investigator Jameson recommended arrived. Her name was Susan Lee, sharp, efficient, relentless. She spent hours combing Richard's study, photographing files, piecing together timelines. At midnight, she laid it out. Mrs. Carter, your husband wasn't just laundering money. He was also providing intelligence. These records match investigations into organized crime families. The FBI may already know. The contradiction made my head spin. So which was he? A criminal, or an informant? Susan's expression was grave. Possibly both. The phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Mom, Colin's voice, low, urgent. We need to meet. Tonight. I have nothing to say to you. You don't understand. Dad wasn't who you thought he was. If you don't work with us, you'll lose everything. The FBI's involved. Nadia's lawyers are cutting a deal. You'll be left with nothing. Nothing? My voice turned steel. Richard left me everything. You stole it. You forged, lied, and discarded me. Don't lecture me about nothing. Mom, listen, if you don't come to the table, you could be charged too. The money is dirty. But if you side with us, We can negotiate immunity for all of us. You keep 5 million and the house. The rest goes back. It's the only way. It was almost laughable. My son, who'd thrown me into a budget motel with $200, was now offering me a fraction of my own inheritance, as if I should be grateful. Colin, I said coldly, you're still underestimating me. I hung up and called Detective Ramirez immediately. Detective, I said, if they're trying to cut a deal, I want in, but on my terms. You'll get everything they know. I'll wear a wire. There was a pause. Then Ramirez's voice, Mrs. Carter, you might just be the bravest woman I've met. That night, as I taped the wire to my chest, I realized the truth. The woman who had quietly served as wife and mother for decades was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who wasn't afraid to burn down the lies that had caged her. Tomorrow, Colin and Nadia would sit across from me, thinking they were about to win. Tomorrow, they'd learn the board had changed. And the Queen was done playing nice. At precisely 8 p.m., Colin and Nadia arrived at my house, dressed as if they were attending a corporate gala instead of conspiring to escape felony charges. Colin carried a slim leather briefcase. Nadia wore her confidence like armor. Mom, Colin said with rehearsed warmth, kissing my cheek, you look wonderful. I'm glad we can finally work this out. I smiled thinly. I feel better. Clarity has that effect. They settled at the dining table. Colin opened his briefcase, sliding papers across to me. Our attorney structured this deal. You retain the house and 5 million in clean assets. We resolve everything quietly. Everyone moves on. Clean assets, I repeated. Interesting phrase. Nadia leaned forward. Elaine, the rest of the money is tainted. You don't want the FBI seizing it. This is the safest outcome. I glanced at the hidden recording device taped beneath my blouse. The red light was steady. Every word was being captured. And you too? I asked softly. What do you get? Colin's confidence swelled. Immunity. The fraud charges disappear. My reputation remains intact. We can rebuild as a family. Family, I echoed. That's what you called it when you threw me out of my home with $200? His jaw tightened. I was protecting you from things you didn't understand. No, Colin. You were protecting yourself. Before he could answer, the sound of footsteps filled the hallway. Agent Ramirez and 2 FBI agents entered, badges flashing. Colin Carter. Nadia Carter. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion of a federal witness. Nadia shot to her feet. This is outrageous. She's confused, she doesn't. Save it for court, Ramirez said, snapping cuffs onto her wrists. Colin turned to me, his face a mask of betrayal. Mom, how could you? We're family. I held his gaze. So was I. But you forgot that when you decided I was disposable. As they were led out, Colin made one last desperate attempt. Mom, you don't understand. Dad's business wasn't clean. You've put yourself in danger. There are people who... Mr. Carter, Agent Ramirez cut in, are you threatening a federal witness? No, I'm warning her. There are people connected to Dad's company, dangerous people. The agent's expression was stone. You just added witness intimidation to your charges. The door slammed behind them. The silence that followed was heavier than any grief. Ramirez sat across from me. He's not entirely wrong, Elaine. Your husband was tied to organized crime families. But there's something you should know. She placed a thick folder on the table. For 12 years, Richard was our informant. He appeared to launder money, but he was funneling intelligence to the FBI. His cooperation led to dozens of convictions and hundreds of millions in assets seized. I froze. You're saying Richard wasn't a criminal? Not in the way your son thinks. He was working undercover. Everything he left you is legally yours. He protected you the best way he knew how. I sank back in my chair, a tidal wave of relief and grief colliding. My husband had been a double life I never suspected, but in the end, he had safeguarded me. 6 months later, the house on the North Shore looked nothing like the one I had lived in for decades. The study Richard once kept like a shrine to business had become my art studio, where canvases bloomed with color. The kitchen gleamed with countertops I chose, not compromises Richard preferred. Colin and Nadia were serving 18-month federal sentences. Their mugshots had graced every local paper. Their names, once synonymous with success, were now cautionary tales. As for me, I was no longer invisible. I had founded the Elaine Carter Foundation for Elder Justice, dedicating a portion of my inheritance to protect seniors from the very betrayal I endured. A national news network had interviewed me. Netflix had called about a documentary. People stopped me in the grocery store to thank me. To tell me I had given them courage. One morning, I received a letter from Colin. The 17th since his arrest. I didn't open it. Some relationships, once broken, could never be rebuilt. Family, I had learned, isn't defined by blood. It's defined by loyalty. By who protects you when you're vulnerable, and who tries to destroy you. As I stood in my sunlit studio, brush in hand, I painted the woman I had become. Strong. Independent. Unafraid. The woman who had once been discarded like an old coat was now the one holding all the cards. The queen had claimed the board. Checkmate. Do well to like, subscribe and share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.